Picture a librarian, not in some quiet, modern building, but 6,000 years ago in the dust of Mesopotamia. He isn't working with paper, but with wet clay and a reed stylus. With painstaking precision, he presses wedges into a tablet, recording inventories, laws, and the deeds of kings. We see this as the dawn of history, the moment we began writing our own story. Except, what if he wasn't writing our story at all? What if he was taking dictation? What if the first words ever written by human hands weren't about us, but about them? Beings who descended from the heavens and fashioned humanity for a purpose we have long since forgotten. This isn't just a myth. It's what the oldest records in the world actually say. And if you're using this video to fall asleep, perfect. That's exactly what it's for. So maybe hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you are and what time it is. I genuinely love checking those. It's wild seeing London at sunrise, New York at lunch, Los Angeles at midnight, all watching at the same time. Today, we're going on a journey not just back in time, but beneath it. We are going to peel back the comfortable layers of history you learned in school and look at the raw data underneath. We will travel to ancient Sumer, the cradle of civilization, and examine the clay tablets they left behind. First, we will look at the official story, the one that fits neatly into our textbooks. Then, we will shine a light on the cracks in that story, records of kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years. From there, we will dare to read their myths not as fantasy, but as a potential history. A history of powerful beings they called the Anunnaki, who came from the sky, altered our genetic code, and built us as a species of workers. The implications are staggering. This journey will force you to question the very definition of what it means to be human. Think about the world before writing. It's a fog, a vast, silent expanse of time we call prehistory. We have bones, stone tools, and cave paintings, but no names, no dates, no stories told in their own words. Then suddenly, around 3,500 BC, in the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, a light switches on. The Sumerians. In what feels like an evolutionary blink of an eye, they invent the city, the wheel, complex irrigation, astronomy, mathematics, and law. And most importantly, they invent writing. For the first time, humanity can speak directly to the future. This is the story we are told. An explosion of human ingenuity. A spontaneous leap from primitive hunter-gatherer to sophisticated urbanite. We built the first ziggurats, established the first monarchies, and wrote the first epic poems, like the Tale of Gilgamesh. Their scribes kept meticulous records of everything, from grain shipments to religious rituals. They were obsessive accountants, astronomers, and historians. And because they were so meticulous, so dedicated to an accurate record, we are forced to confront the things they wrote that make absolutely no sense. This is where the smooth, comfortable narrative begins to fracture. Among the thousands of tablets unearthed from the sands of modern-day Iraq, archaeologists found a truly bewildering document. It's called the Sumerian King List. It is exactly what it sounds like. A list of all the kings of Sumer, their capitals, and the length of their reigns. It starts off conventionally enough, but as you read backward in time, the numbers become impossible. The list is divided into two parts: the kings who ruled before a great flood, and the kings who ruled after. After the flood, the reigns are long, but they are within the realm of human biology. A few hundred years, then 100, then they gradually shorten to the normal lifespans we see in other historical records. But before the flood, the numbers are astronomical. The list states that 8 kings reigned over 5 cities for a total of 241,200 years. One king, Enmenluana, is said to have ruled for 43,200 years. Another, Alalngar, for 36,000 years. What do we do with this? Historians and archaeologists generally do one of two things. They either dismiss these numbers as pure myth, a symbolic representation of a glorious God-touched past, or they suggest a scribal error, perhaps confusing decimal points or misinterpreting an earlier numbering system. But this explanation feels thin, doesn't it? These were the same people who developed base 60 mathematics, a system so precise that we still use it today to measure our minutes and our seconds. They mapped the constellations and could predict eclipses. These were not people who made casual multi-thousand-year mathematical errors. And they were insistent. The king list is not a single, isolated tablet. We have found more than a dozen copies and fragments of it, all consistent in their telling. For the Sumerians, this was not a myth. This was their history. So what if we, just for a moment, take them at their word? What if kings really did rule for lifetimes that are, to us, geological in scale? This forces a terrifying question. Were those kings human? Or were they something else entirely? The king list is our first clue that the people who invented history may have had a very different history than the one we have written for them. It is the first thread we pull, and as we pull it, the entire tapestry of our accepted past begins to unravel. To understand what they might have been talking about, we have to go deeper into the heart of their culture, their creation stories. Every civilization has a creation myth, a story to explain where the world and its people came from. We tend to view these as primitive allegories, poetic attempts to make sense of a mysterious universe, but the Sumerian stories read differently. When you strip away the poetic language, they read less like myths and more like technical manuals. They read like reports. The most famous of these is the Enuma Elish. It describes a time when the solar system was young and chaotic. Planets are described not as distant lights, but as living gods in violent conflict. It speaks of a rogue planet, a massive intruder that smashed into an older planet named Tiamat. That collision, the text says, shattered Tiamat. One half became the asteroid belt, the other half was shunted into a new orbit along with Tiamat's primary moon and became the Earth. This is a story of planetary mechanics, of orbital dynamics and celestial collision, written down thousands of years before the Copernican revolution. How could they possibly have known this? But the story that truly shatters our paradigm is the one about the creation of humanity itself. According to multiple texts, including the epic of Atrahasis, our planet was once inhabited by a race of beings they called the Anunnaki. The word itself is revealing. In Sumerian, Hoya, and means heaven or sky. Una means to descend. Ki means earth. The Anunnaki were, quite literally, those who from heaven to earth came. They were not ethereal spirits or gods in the modern sense. They are described as physical, biological beings who ate, drank, argued, fought, and ruled. The texts say, the Anunnaki came here for a reason. They needed a resource, specifically gold, not for decoration or currency, but for something far more critical. According to interpretations of the text, their home planet's atmosphere was failing, and they needed monoatomic gold particles to suspend in their upper atmosphere to repair it. It was a desperate planetary-scale geoengineering project. The problem was, mining this gold was brutal, back-breaking work. Initially, a lower class of Anunnaki, called the Igigi, were tasked with the labour. They toiled for thousands of years in the mines of what is now southern Africa. But eventually, they rebelled. They burned their tools, and surrounded the fortress of the chief Anunnaki leader, Enlil. They refused to work any longer. This created a crisis. The entire mission was in jeopardy. It was another leader, a brilliant scientist and Enlil's half-brother named Enki, who proposed a shocking solution. He said, "Let us not do the work ourselves. Let us create a worker, a primitive labourer. Let us create," the text says, a Lulu Amelu, a mixed worker. And how did he propose to do this? He said, "We will take the existing creature on this planet, a wild hominid that was already evolving in Africa, and we will bind upon it the image of the gods. We will upgrade it." The descriptions that follow are eerily specific. They speak of taking the essence of a young Anunnaki male, mixing it with the egg of a female hominid, and implanting the resulting embryo into the womb of a female Anunnaki, a birth goddess. They describe multiple failed attempts, resulting in deformed creatures until they finally perfected the process. The result was the first of our kind, the Adamu, the earthling. The linguistic parallel to the biblical Adam is impossible to ignore. Pause for a moment and consider what is being described here. This is a 6,000-year-old story detailing in vitro fertilization and genetic engineering. It describes the creation of a hybrid species by combining the DNA of an advanced being with that of a primitive one. They weren't just making a clay statue and breathing life into it. They were describing a biological procedure. The texts are so clear on this point. They made us in their image, yes, but for a purpose, to be their slaves, to take over the burden of mining the gold they so desperately needed. Our entire species, according to our oldest records, was born in a test tube to serve as a workforce for extraterrestrials. This is the central, mind-blowing claim hidden in the Sumerian tablets. It's an idea so radical that it's easy to dismiss as pure fantasy, but the details keep piling up. The Sumerians didn't just write about these Anunnaki, they drew them. On cylinder seals and stone carvings, we see figures that are clearly not human. They're often depicted as much larger than the humans around them. They're shown holding strange devices and wearing what look like wristwatches or communication devices. Most famously, they're often depicted with wings. Mainstream archaeology calls these angels or symbolic representations of divinity. But what if they weren't symbolic? What if they were a literal depiction of beings who could fly, or beings who used flying machines? Let's look at another word the Sumerians used: Shem. For centuries, this word has been translated as name or renown. So a king with a great Shem was a king with a great name. But this translation is incomplete. The root of the word seems to be related to the Akkadian Shamu, which means that which is highward. The biblical scholar Zechariah Sitchin, whose work is highly controversial but undeniably thought-provoking, argued that Shem did not mean name at all. He argued it meant a skyborne vehicle, a rocket ship. Suddenly passages in ancient texts take on a completely different meaning. When the biblical Tower of Babel is built, the goal is to build a tower with a Shem at its top to reach the heavens. The standard interpretation is they wanted to make a great name for themselves. But what if they were literally building a launch tower for a sky vehicle? It sounds insane, until you realize the Sumerian texts are filled with descriptions of the Anunnaki ascending to the heavens in fiery chariots, accompanied by thunder and shaking earth. These sound less like spiritual ascensions and more like rocket launches. And then there is their impossible knowledge of the cosmos. In the Berlin Museum, there is a Sumerian cylinder seal, VA/243, that has become the centre of intense debate. It depicts the sun, surrounded by all the planets we know of today. There's Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. But then it keeps going. It also depicts Uranus and Neptune, planets we did not officially discover until 1781 and 1846, respectively. And it even shows Pluto, which we only found in 1930, and which is so small and distant you need a powerful telescope to see it. How could they know this? It gets even stranger. The Sumerian texts describe Uranus and Neptune with a level of detail that is frankly impossible. They describe Uranus as mash.sig, which translates to bright greenish. We only learned that Uranus is a pale greenish-blue gas giant after our Voyager 2 spacecraft flew by it in 1986. They describe Neptune as a watery blue-green planet. Again, a fact confirmed by Voyager 2 in 1989. They possessed specific, verifiable astronomical knowledge that they should not have had. The conventional explanation is that it's all a coincidence, that these are just depictions of stars, not planets, and any resemblance is pure chance. But the Sumerians were master astronomers. They clearly distinguished between stars, which stayed in fixed patterns, and planets, the wandering stars that moved across the sky. The seal shows these bodies orbiting the sun. They knew they were part of a solar system. Where did they get this information? The texts themselves provide an answer. They say the Anunnaki gave it to them. It was knowledge passed down from the beings who actually travelled through the solar system and saw these worlds up close. This knowledge also includes the centrepiece of their cosmology, the existence of a 12th planet. We count 9 or 8 if you exclude Pluto, plus the Sun and the Moon. The Sumerians counted 12. They insisted there was one more massive planet in our solar system, the home planet of the Anunnaki. They called it Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. They described its orbit not as circular like the others, but as a vast 3,600-year elliptical loop that takes it far out into deep space and then brings it back through the inner solar system, crossing the plane of the other planets between Mars and Jupiter. It was this periodic return of Nibiru, they claimed, that dictated the rhythm of life on Earth. Each time the planet returned, the Anunnaki could travel back and forth more easily. It was a time of great upheaval, but also great progress, as new knowledge and new directives were handed down to humanity. It's a wild theory, and for decades it was dismissed as pure fiction. But in recent years, modern astronomy has started to find evidence that something might be out there. Astronomers like Mike Brown and Konstantin Batygin at Caltech have noted strange gravitational anomalies in the orbits of objects in the Kuiper Belt, far beyond Neptune. Their calculations suggest these anomalies can only be explained by the presence of a huge undiscovered planet, a planet 9, with an elongated elliptical orbit that takes it thousands of years to circle the Sun. They haven't seen it yet, but they see its gravitational footprint. Is it possible that our cutting-edge science is, after thousands of years, finally catching up to the knowledge recorded on ancient Sumerian clay? The story doesn't end with our creation. The Sumerian texts also contain a story that should be chillingly familiar to everyone. They tell of a great flood. Not a local flood in Mesopotamia, but a global deluge that wiped out almost all life on Earth. In the Sumerian version, the Epic of Gilgamesh, a man named Utnapishtim is warned of the coming cataclysm by the god Enki. Enki, the same scientist who helped create humanity, had grown fond of his creation. But his brother, the commander Enlil, had grown tired of humanity's noise and clamour. He saw them as a failed experiment and convinced the Anunnaki Council to let the flood wipe the slate clean. Enki, acting in secret, instructed Utnapishtim to build a massive boat, a submersible vessel, and to load it with his family and the seed of all living things. The descriptions of the boat's construction are incredibly detailed, giving precise dimensions and material requirements. When the flood came, a terrifying world-ending storm, Utnapishtim and his ark survived. This story, of course, is the clear precursor to the biblical story of Noah, but the Sumerian version is older by at least 1,000 years. And this story isn't unique to Sumer or the Bible. We find tales of a catastrophic global flood in over 200 cultures around the world, from the Americas to Australia to India. Why is this story so universal? Perhaps it's a shared memory, an echo of a real geological event that was passed down through oral tradition. But the Sumerian version adds another layer. It wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a deliberate act by the gods to cull the human population. And the survival of humanity wasn't an act of random chance. It was a rescue mission orchestrated by one of our creators who defied the will of his commander. The flood was a reset button, but it was also a story about the preservation of knowledge. The man chosen to survive was chosen to carry forward the lineage and the information given to humanity by their creators. After the flood, the Sumerian king list picks up again, but the numbers have changed. The reigns of kings are now measured in hundreds of years, not tens of thousands. Something fundamental shifted. The direct open rule of the Anunnaki seems to have ended. They began to recede, to operate from behind the scenes. They established human kingship, creating a buffer, a class of intermediaries to rule on their behalf. These were the first priest kings, the demigods, who could supposedly speak directly to the gods. This established a pattern that has defined human history ever since, a hierarchical structure of power, with a ruling elite claiming a divine right to rule over the masses. Is it possible that our entire concept of monarchy, of royalty, of a blue blood lineage is a distant echo of this Anunnaki system? A system where a select few human bloodlines were chosen to carry on the will of our former masters. The symbols of power we still use today, the eagle, the lion, the serpent, were all symbols directly associated with different Anunnaki gods. We may have forgotten the meaning, but we have faithfully preserved the symbols. So where does this leave us? We have two competing narratives. The first is the comfortable mainstream story of humanity's slow, steady climb from the Stone Age, a story of pure human ingenuity. The second is the story written by the Sumerians themselves, a story of genetic engineering, extraterrestrial visitation, and a forgotten history where we were created to be slaves. One of these stories is accepted as fact, the other is dismissed as myth, but the one dismissed as myth is the one that seems to better explain the anomalies in the record. The impossible reigns of the kings, the sudden explosion of advanced civilization from nothing, the inexplicable astronomical knowledge, and the global flood myths. The academic world, by and large, refuses to engage with this second narrative. The primary argument is one of translation. Cuneiform is an incredibly complex dead language. Many words have multiple meanings, and the choice of which meaning to use is often based on the preconceived context of the translator. If a translator believes they're reading a myth about spiritual gods, they will choose words like spirit, heaven, and name. If, however, one dares to believe they're reading a historical account of physical beings with advanced technology, they might choose words like genetic essence, sky, and rocket ship. The same set of symbols can produce two radically different stories. The problem is that the mythological interpretation leave so many questions unanswered. Why were these meticulous record keepers writing down impossible numbers in their official histories? How did they know the colour of Neptune? Why do their creation myths read like a scientific paper on genetic modification? The ancient astronaut theory, as radical as it sounds, provides a single, cohesive framework that explains all of these anomalies. It suggests that the Sumerians weren't writing myths at all. They were just writing down what they saw. They were journalists, not poets. Think about the implications if this is true. It changes everything. It means our species is not a product of blind natural evolution alone. We are a hybrid, an engineered species. We have the DNA of this planet, the legacy of the early hominids who roamed Africa. But we also have something else woven into our code, a genetic gift or a genetic curse from beings who are not from here. This could explain the missing link that paleoanthropologists have searched for so long. The leap from Homo erectus to Homo sapiens was incredibly rapid, almost instantaneous in geological terms. Our brain capacity exploded. We developed language and complex consciousness. Perhaps the missing link isn't a fossil we need to dig up. Perhaps it was an event that took place in a laboratory. It would also reframe our deepest spiritual and religious instincts, the human urge to worship, to look to the heavens for salvation, to pray to powerful unseen beings who control our fate. Where does that come from? What if it's a programmed-in memory, a residual echo of a time when our gods were real, physical beings who walked among us, who gave us our laws, and who held the power of life and death in their hands? Our religions could be the cargo cults of a forgotten age, the rituals and stories we continue to practice long after the gods themselves have departed. The Anunnaki are described as having left Earth. The texts are not entirely clear on why or when, but the story suggests their mission was eventually completed, or perhaps their own internal conflicts, and the conflicts with their human creations became too much to manage. They departed, leaving humanity to its own devices, but with a legacy of knowledge, a set of ruling bloodlines, and a deep, unconscious memory of our creators. Could this explain the cyclical nature of human civilization, the rise and fall of great empires? Perhaps we are following a script, a developmental program laid out for us long ago. Perhaps the knowledge they gave us was deliberately fragmented, designed to be rediscovered in stages. The bursts of technological and scientific progress we experience might not be random acts of genius, but the unlocking of latent information, a reawakening of a part of ourselves that has been dormant for millennia. We are a species with a strange duality. We are capable of incredible acts of love, creativity, and empathy, yet we are also capable of unimaginable violence, greed, and destruction. We are constantly at war with ourselves. The Sumerian texts describe this duality perfectly. They say Enki, the scientist who created us, was a benefactor, keen to see his creation thrive and evolve. But Enlil, the commander, saw us only as a tool, a resource to be controlled and, if necessary, disposed of. This fundamental conflict between the Anunnaki leaders was, the texts say, imprinted upon us. Are we living out the political drama of our creators? Is the conflict within our own nature the echo of a war between the gods who made us? The story embedded in these ancient clay tablets is more than just an alternative history. It is a challenge to our identity. It asks us to consider that we are not who we think we are. We are a species with amnesia, living in the ruins of a history so profound and so strange that we have convinced ourselves it must be a dream. But the evidence is there, baked in clay, waiting in museum basements for anyone brave enough to read it, not as myth, but as memory. What we are talking about is a fundamental re-evaluation of the human story. The timeline we have constructed for ourselves, with civilization beginning just a few thousand years ago, might be a tiny recent chapter in a much, much longer book. The advanced knowledge of the Sumerians, the architectural impossibilities of ancient sites like Göbekli Tepe, which predates Sumer by 6,000 years, the consistent stories of sky gods across dozens of cultures. These are all puzzle pieces that do not fit the conventional picture, but they snap together perfectly if you allow for the possibility that we are not the first advanced civilization on this planet. So the next time you look up at the night sky, at the countless stars scattered across the darkness, consider a different possibility. We have always looked up there and wondered, are we alone? But perhaps that's the wrong question. Perhaps the real question is, have we always been? The Sumerian records, etched in clay by the first scribes in history, give us an answer that is both terrifying and magnificent. They tell us that we are not alone, and we never have been. They tell us that our history is not our own. Our very DNA is a message from the stars. We just have to learn how to read it. The truth is not out there. It's in here. It's been with us all along, and it could erase everything we think we know about ourselves. This genetic blueprint is the beginning, but it is not the only place they left their mark. What if the proof of this staggering history is not just written in our cells or on clay tablets, but is carved into the very bedrock of our planet? What if the evidence for their industrial-scale operation has been sitting in plain sight for millennia, dismissed by us as natural formations or primitive ritual sites? Let's journey south, far from the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia, to the southern tip of Africa. The texts claim this was the location of their primary mining operation, the Abzu, the land of the deep. And it is here, in the mountains of Mpumalanga, South Africa, that we find a site that defies all conventional timelines. It is called Adam's Calendar. It is a series of standing stones arranged in a precise circle, with clear astronomical alignments. Mainstream geology dates the stones themselves to be ancient, but the arrangement is typically attributed to humans from a few thousand years ago. But some geologists and independent researchers have proposed a mind-blowing alternative. Based on erosion patterns and the slow growth of dolomite rock on which the stones are placed, they suggest the stones were erected not thousands, but hundreds of thousands of years ago. Some estimates push the date back to 200,000 years or more. This is a date that makes no sense. Homo sapiens, our species, were just beginning to emerge. The idea that primitive humans were building complex astronomical calendars at that time is academic heresy. But what if it wasn't built by primitive humans? What if it was built by the Anunnaki, a calendar to track the long years of their stay on a foreign planet, a tool for their vast mining enterprise? And the calendar is not alone. Archaeologists have discovered the faint traces of what appear to be hundreds of thousands of stone structures across the plains of southern Africa, visible mostly from the air. Many are connected by what look like ancient roads or channels. The sheer scale is unprecedented. The mainstream view is that these are the remains of cattle enclosures from a few hundred years ago, but the numbers don't add up. There are too many, and their geological age, based on weathering, seems far, far older. What if we are looking at the ruins of the Anunnaki gold mines, the administrative centres, the processing plants, the worker settlements, an ancient, sprawling industrial complex that predates human civilization, by a geological age. It would mean that long before we built our first cities, another civilization had already risen and perhaps fallen, right under our feet. We walk on the bones of their history, mistaking their abandoned infrastructure for the random patterns of nature. To understand this operation, we have to understand its architects. The texts don't just speak of the Anunnaki as a monolithic group. They give us a family drama, a cosmic soap opera of gods with very human emotions: ambition, jealousy, love, and rage. At the top of the hierarchy was Anu, the distant king who ruled from Nibiru. His two most important sons were the ones who managed the Earth mission: Enlil, the commander, and Enki, the chief scientist. We've met them. They represent the central conflict: order versus creation, control versus compassion. Enlil was the stern military leader, concerned with rules, production quotas, and maintaining the hierarchy. Enki was the brilliant, rebellious scientist, fascinated by the life on Earth, and ultimately the creator and protector of humanity. But there were others, a cast of characters whose stories have echoed down into all our later mythologies. There was Nanna, the son of Enlil, who was put in charge of the city of Ur and was associated with the moon. His symbol, the crescent moon, became the symbol of that entire region for thousands of years. There was Ninurta, another son of Enlil, the great warrior and hero, who fought epic battles against monstrous beings and rebellious gods. His stories read like the prototype for Hercules or Thor. And then there was Inanna, known to the later Akkadians as Ishtar. She was the granddaughter of Enlil, a figure of breathtaking complexity. She was the goddess of love and fertility, but also the goddess of war and destruction. She was fiercely independent, ambitious, and utterly ruthless. Her tales describe her travelling the heavens in her skyboat, laying claim to cities, demanding worship, and seducing gods and mortals alike. She's perhaps the most vibrant and terrifying of all the Anunnaki described, a being of pure, unrestrained power who saw Earth and its inhabitants as her personal playground. These were not abstract deities, they were described as individuals with territories, responsibilities, and bitter rivalries. The division of Earth into different sectors, controlled by different Anunnaki leaders and their clans, set the stage for endless conflict. The texts are filled with accounts of their wars, and these were not clashes with swords and spears. The descriptions are of terrifying high-tech warfare. They speak of weapons that could level mountains and turn landscapes to dust. They describe a brilliance or a radiance that was worn by the gods, a weapon so powerful that mortals could not even look upon it without being harmed. They tell of the weapon that flashes, which could kill from afar, and of poisoned radioactive winds that would sweep through a region after a battle, killing all life. One of the most harrowing texts describes a great war between the factions of Enlil and Enki, culminating in the use of 7 weapons of terror against several cities in the Fertile Crescent, including the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. The text describes a blinding flash, a storm that scorched the sky, and an evil wind that swept from the west. After this event, the texts say, the cities were obliterated, and the land became sterile for generations. The description is an almost perfect match for the effects of a nuclear detonation. Is it possible that the biblical story of Sodom and Gomorrah is a filtered, moralized account of a nuclear exchange between rival extraterrestrial factions? Geologists have confirmed that the southern end of the Dead Sea, the area where these cities were thought to be, suffered a catastrophic, high-temperature event sometime around 2000 BC, an event that collapsed the ground and vaporized the water. The cause is unknown. Imagine the humans on the ground, primitive people caught in the crossfire of a war between beings they saw as gods. Their cities turned to glass, their people dying of an invisible poison carried on the wind. It would be a terrifying, world-shattering event. It would be a memory that would be burned into the collective consciousness of humanity for all time, a story to be told and retold, a warning of the terrible wrath of the gods. We may be looking for evidence of ancient alien visitation in all the wrong places. Perhaps we should be looking for the blast craters. Perhaps the deserts of our world are not all natural. Some of them may be scars. These conflicts were often fought over control of resources, and most importantly, control of information and power. Central to this struggle was an object, or perhaps a device, called the Tablets of Destiny. The text described these tablets as holding the keys to the entire Earth mission. They contained the orbital formulas for all the planets, the master command codes for the technology, and the ultimate authority to rule. To hold the Tablets of Destiny was to be the supreme commander. The stories tell of these tablets being stolen, fought over, and transferred from one god to another. In one famous story, a winged monster god named Zu steals the tablets from Enlil's fortress, throwing the entire Anunnaki operation into chaos. The hero god Ninurta is sent to retrieve them, leading to an epic aerial battle described with stunning detail. He uses a 7-bladed arrow and a net that knows no escape to defeat Zu and restore order. What were these tablets? Were they literal stone or clay tablets with writing? Or was tablet just the closest word the Sumerians had for something they didn't understand? Could they have been a piece of advanced technology, a portable supercomputer, a master control device, holding the source code for their entire planetary system? The struggle for the Tablets of Destiny reads like a mythological retelling of a cyber war, a battle for control of the ultimate operating system. This suggests a level of technological sophistication that goes far beyond simple rocket ships. It implies a society built on information, where control of data meant control of reality itself. This level of technology would have extended to biology and medicine as well. We've already seen their ability to manipulate genetics to create our species, but the texts suggest their medical knowledge was equally profound. They had the ability to heal wounds that would be fatal to humans, and they possessed the secrets to incredible longevity. This is where the demigods come in. The Anunnaki leaders, particularly the males, frequently took human partners. The offspring of these unions were a special class of beings, part god and part human. The most famous of these is Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk. The epic that bears his name describes him as 2/3 divine and 1/3 mortal. He possessed superhuman strength and wisdom, but he was cursed with the one thing his Anunnaki father did not have: mortality. The entire second half of his epic is a desperate, heart-breaking quest for immortality. He travels to the ends of the earth to find his ancestor, Utnapishtim, the survivor of the flood, who had been granted eternal life by the gods. He seeks the secret, the technology, the cure for death. This story is a profound exploration of the human condition, our terror of oblivion. But what if it's also a historical account of the biological reality of these hybrid beings? They lived far longer than normal humans, but they were not true immortals like their Anunnaki parents. They were caught in between, possessing the power of gods, but the fate of men. This may have been by design, a way to ensure that these powerful hybrids could never truly challenge their creators. It was a built-in kill switch. The Anunnaki gave us life, but they kept the secrets of eternal life for themselves. This story of powerful beings from the sky creating and then ruling over humanity is not confined to Sumer. When you pull back and look at the globe, you begin to see the same story, the same archetypes appearing everywhere, dressed in local cultural clothing. It's as if one master story was told to the entire world, and each culture created its own version. Travel to ancient Egypt. Their gods are also described as physical beings who came from the stars and ruled directly over humanity in a golden age called Zep Tepi the first time. Their first divine king, Ptah, is a creator god strikingly similar to Enki. He is the master craftsman and inventor. His successor, Ra, is a powerful sky god who travels the heavens in a solar barge, a clear parallel to the Anunnaki and their Shems. The Egyptian pantheon, with its endless family squabbles, its tales of Osiris being murdered by his jealous brother Set, and the epic battles of Horus, reads like a direct echo of the Anunnaki family drama between Enki, Enlil, and their descendants. The symbols are the same. The Egyptian Ankh, the symbol of life, is nearly identical to a Sumerian symbol for a specific type of metal ingot, part of the gold mining operation. Coincidence or a shared historical source? Now cross the ocean to Mesoamerica. The Mayan and Aztec legends speak of Quetzalcoatl, a pale, bearded god who came from the east in a smoking serpent vehicle. He brought them knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and law. He ruled for a time and then departed, promising to return. He was a civilizing hero, a teacher god, just like Enki. The incredible precision of the Mayan calendar, their sophisticated mathematics, and their deep understanding of astronomical cycles seem to appear from nowhere, just as they did in Sumer. Journey to India and read the ancient Sanskrit texts, the Vedas and the Puranas. They are filled with stories of gods flying in celestial chariots, called vimanas. The texts describe these machines in incredible detail, talking about their propulsion systems, their flight characteristics, and their use in devastating wars. The Ramayana describes a war in which weapons are used that can destroy the entire race and create a light brighter than 1,000 suns. Again, we see the same pattern. Sky gods, advanced technology, and catastrophic wars, all recorded in the oldest, most sacred texts of a civilization. How is this possible? How can cultures separated by vast oceans and thousands of years all be telling the same fundamental story? The conventional explanation is that these are universal archetypes, that the human brain is simply wired to invent similar myths to explain the world. But that feels like an insufficient answer. The details are too specific, the parallels too precise. The alternative is that this is not a psychological archetype. It is a shared memory, a memory of a time when the entire world was under the influence of a single, global, technologically advanced civilization, a civilization of Anunnaki. This brings us back to those impossible lifespans in the Sumerian king list. The 43,200 years for one king. The 241,200 years for the first 8 kings before the flood. We dismiss this as myth, as symbolism, but what if we've been misunderstanding the very nature of time as they recorded it? The Anunnaki, the texts insist, came from Nibiru, and Nibiru, they said, had a massive 3,600-year orbit around our sun. What if the Sumerian scribes were sometimes recording events in Anunnaki time, not human time? What if a Shah, a Sumerian unit of measurement equaling 3,600, was not just a number, but also represented 1 year for the Anunnaki, One single orbit of their homeworld? Let's do the math. The total reign of the pre-flood kings is given as 241,200 years. Divide that by 3,600. You get 67. We are suddenly in the realm of the plausible. Perhaps the entire period of direct Anunnaki rule on Earth before the flood lasted for 67 Nibiruan years. Let's look at an individual king. Alangar ruled for 36,000 years. Divide that by 3,600. That's 10 Shahs, 10 Nibiruan years. Suddenly, the impossible numbers become a coded message, a conversion factor between their calendar and ours. The Sumerian scribes, acting as historians for two different species, may have been switching between two different systems of timekeeping. They were not making mathematical errors. They were performing a complex astronomical and historical calculation. This simple act of division, of looking at their history through the lens of their cosmology, cracks open the entire mystery. It suggests that these beings experience time on a scale that is almost unimaginable to us. Their lives were tied to the slow, majestic rhythm of their home planet's vast orbit. An assignment on Earth that lasted for thousands of our years might have felt like a short tour of duty to them. Our entire history, from the first cities to the present day, would be less than 2 of their years. We are a flicker, a brief explosive experiment they initiated and then left to unfold. This vast difference in timescale would have defined their relationship with us. How could you form a true partnership with a creature whose entire lifespan is a fraction of one of your seasons? You wouldn't. You would see them as we see mayflies, or perhaps more accurately, as we see livestock, a resource to be managed, cultivated, and culled over generations. This perspective is cold, it's brutal, but it makes a terrifying amount of sense. It explains the detachment, the cruelty, the willingness of a commander like Enlil to wipe the slate clean with a global flood. When your timescale is geological, a species is just an experiment. This reframing of time also sheds new light on the promise of their return. Cultures all over the world, from the Mayans awaiting Quetzalcoatl to the Judeo-Christian expectation of a Messiah, have a deep-rooted belief in the return of their founding gods. What if this is not just a spiritual hope, but a cosmological appointment? The Sumerian text claimed that major events on Earth were tied to the passage of Nibiru through the inner solar system. What if their return is simply the next time their planet's orbit brings them close enough to ours for an easy journey? An event that occurs every 3,600 years would be so rare that for humanity it would always be a myth, a distant legend. No civilization would last long enough to experience it twice. But for the Anunnaki, it would be a regular, predictable event, like a train arriving at the station right on schedule. Are we living in the interval between these arrivals? Are we a seed that was planted, left to grow wild, with the full knowledge that the gardeners would one day return to see what has become of their creation? It is a staggering thought. It transforms eschatology into astronomy. The end of the world becomes a matter of orbital mechanics, and so we are left with a ghost in our own machine, a whisper in our DNA of a forgotten parentage. The evidence is scattered, fragmented, and buried under millennia of deliberate misinterpretation and academic ridicule. But it refuses to go away. The stories are too persistent. The archaeological anomalies are too strange. The sudden leaps in human evolution and civilization are too abrupt to be explained by slow, gradual processes. Something happened. Something intervened. We have been taught to see ourselves as the pinnacle of a long, unbroken chain of evolution on this planet, a lucky accident of chemistry and time. But the oldest voices of our own species tell a different story. They tell us that we are not an accident. We are a product, a creation, that our intelligence, our consciousness, our very hands that build and write and create were given to us for a purpose we were never meant to understand. We are the children of the gods, but we were also their slaves, and that profound, terrifying contradiction may be the central truth of what it means to be human. The mystery of the Anunnaki is not about aliens from a distant star. It is the story of us. It is the family secret we have been keeping from ourselves for 6,000 years, and the clues to unlocking it are all around us, waiting for the day we are finally ready to listen. That intervention wasn't subtle. It wasn't a gentle nudge on the path of evolution. It was a schism, a fracture in the timeline. And the evidence for this global project is not limited to clay tablets in the Middle East. It is written in stone, on a scale that is almost impossible to comprehend, on every continent on Earth. We have been trained to look at these ancient megalithic sites, places like Stonehenge, the pyramids of Giza, Puma Punku in Bolivia, as the isolated works of disconnected, primitive cultures. We see them as tombs, temples, or crude calendars. But what if they are not separate at all? What if they are connected? What if we are looking at the scattered components of a single planetary-wide machine? Think of the world's ancient sites not as monuments, but as infrastructure. Let's look at the Giza Plateau. We are told the Great Pyramid was a tomb for the pharaoh Khufu, yet no body was ever found. It has no elaborate carvings or hieroglyphs like other Egyptian tombs. Instead, it possesses a series of bizarre, unexplained features. Precision-cut shafts aimed at specific star constellations, inner chambers built with granite blocks weighing up to 80 tons, and a level of geometric and mathematical precision that we would struggle to replicate today. Some engineers have suggested the pyramid's internal structure, with its alternating layers of granite and limestone, resembles a massive power generator. They point to the high quartz content in the granite, a material known for its piezoelectric properties, the ability to generate an electric charge under pressure. Was the Great Pyramid a tomb, or was it a power station, humming with an energy we no longer understand, built to power a civilization far beyond our own? And it wasn't just a local power source. These sites seem to be linked. Researchers have long noted that many of the most significant ancient structures on Earth lie along perfectly straight lines that stretch for thousands of miles across oceans and continents. We call them ley lines. Mainstream science dismisses them as coincidence. But what if they are not just lines of spiritual energy? What if they represent the physical traces of an ancient global energy grid? A network that connected these massive stone power plants, beaming energy wirelessly across the globe to power their cities, their vehicles, and their mining operations. We are just now, in the 21st century, beginning to experiment with wireless power transmission. Is it possible we are simply rediscovering a technology that was mastered on Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago? The sheer impossibility of the construction itself screams for a different explanation. Go to Puma Punku in the highlands of Bolivia, 13,000 feet above sea level. Here you find diorite and andesite blocks, some of the hardest stone on the planet, cut with perfect right angles, laser-like precision, and interlocking shapes so complex they look like they were made by a machine. Some blocks have rows of tiny, perfectly drilled holes. No chisel, no matter how sharp, can replicate this work. To achieve this today, you would need diamond-tipped power tools and computer-aided milling machines, Yet we are told this was done by a people who had not yet invented the wheel. Or journey to Baalbek in Lebanon. The foundation of the Temple of Jupiter is built upon a stone platform that beggars belief. It contains the 3 largest worked stone blocks in the world, known as the trilithon. Each one weighs an estimated 800 tons. Nearby, still in the quarry, lies a 4th, even larger block, the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, weighing a staggering 1,200 tons. That is the equivalent of 3 Boeing 747 airplanes. We have no modern crane that could lift this single stone, let alone transport it from the quarry and place it with precision. How did they do it? The local legends say the stones were moved into place by the gods, using sound or a force that made them weightless. Are these just fanciful stories? Or are they a folk memory of a forgotten science, a technology of acoustic levitation or gravity manipulation? When you see these sites not as primitive temples but as the remnants of a global high-tech industrial complex, the pieces start to fit. The impossible construction becomes evidence of advanced tools. The astronomical alignments become necessary for navigation and communication with a home planet. The ley lines become a power grid. The pyramids become the generators. And suddenly, the Anunnaki are no longer just characters in a story. They are engineers. They are builders. And the earth was their workshop. But building the hardware is only half the battle. Once you have created a workforce of hundreds of thousands of newly conscious, intelligent beings, how do you manage them? How do you organize them into a productive, stable society that serves your goals? You don't just give them shovels. You have to give them a social structure. You have to give them an operating system. This is where the story moves, from engineering to social engineering. The Sumerians are credited with inventing law. The famous Code of Hammurabi, one of the oldest deciphered legal texts, is seen as a major step in human progress. But read it closely. It is a brutal, transactional code. It is obsessed with property, contracts, and punishments, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It reads less like a document of justice and more like a set of regulations for managing assets. And what were we, the newly created Lulu Amalu? We were assets. The laws given to us by the gods were not for our benefit. They were for theirs. They were the rules of the factory floor, designed to keep the workers in line and protect the property of the owners. And how do you enforce these laws when you're vastly outnumbered by your workforce? You create a belief system. You invent religion. You transform yourselves from physical masters into divine, all-powerful gods. You create a class of intermediaries, the priest-kings we see in the king list, who can speak for you. They become the middle management. You demand tribute and sacrifice, not because you're hungry for burnt offerings, but because it is a system of taxation, a way to collect the resources and energy of the population and funnel it back to the top of the pyramid. The temples were not just places of worship. They were the administrative centres of the Anunnaki Corporation. They were the banks, the grain silos, the courthouses, and the communication hubs, all wrapped in a cloak of divine authority. The ultimate tool of social control, however, may have been their most profound gift: language itself. The Sumerian language appears in the historical record fully formed, with no apparent precursor. It is an isolate, meaning it is unrelated to any other known language. Its structure is incredibly complex and logical, almost like a computer programming language. What if it was exactly that? What if complex syntactical language was not something we evolved over millennia, but something that was given to us, installed like a new piece of software? Think about it. To manage a complex mining operation, you need workers who can understand complex multi-step instructions. You need them to be able to communicate with each other about abstract concepts. You need them to understand past, present, and future. A language designed by a superior intelligence for this purpose would be an incredible tool. It would literally upgrade human consciousness, allowing us to think in new ways, to plan, to organize, to build. But it would also structure our thoughts in a way that served the goals of our creators. The very words we use to understand the world would have been chosen for us. The Tower of Babel story takes on a new, chilling meaning. The confounding of the languages wasn't a punishment for hubris. It might have been a deliberate act of sabotage, a splintering of the human operating system to prevent us from ever unifying and becoming a threat to our creators. This intervention, this rewriting of our biological and social code, would have left traces, scars, and some of the most compelling evidence might be flowing through your own veins right now. Let's talk about blood. Human blood is categorized by the antigens on the surface of our red blood cells. One of the most important is the rhesus, or Rh factor. You are either Rh positive, meaning you have this antigen, or Rh negative, meaning you don't. About 85% of the world's population is Rh positive, but a strange isolated 15% are Rh negative. This is not just a minor variation, it has profound biological consequences. An Rh negative mother carrying an Rh positive child will see that fetus as a foreign body. Her immune system will create antibodies to attack and destroy the baby's red blood cells. This is a condition called hemolytic disease, and it is almost unheard of in the natural world. Nature does not typically design a species to reject its own offspring. It is a biological conflict. Where did this Rh negative factor come from? Its highest concentrations are found among the Basque people of Spain and France, a group whose language is also a mysterious isolate, unrelated to any other in Europe. Could the Rh negative blood type be a relic? A marker of a different lineage, a genetic signature left over from the Anunnaki themselves, or from a specific hybrid breeding program? A bloodline that is literally, biologically incompatible with the majority of humanity. And what about the code itself? The human genome is a vast, sprawling library of information. For decades, scientists believed that the vast majority of our DNA, something like 97%, was junk. It didn't code for proteins and seemed to serve no purpose. But we are now beginning to realize that this is not junk at all. This non-coding DNA is a hugely complex regulatory system, acting like a master switchboard that turns genes on and off. But what if it's more than that? What if it is a library, a dormant archive? Could the so-called junk DNA contain the rest of the Anunnaki genetic code? A set of instructions and abilities that are currently switched off in us. Abilities like their incredible longevity, their advanced psychic or cognitive functions, their resistance to disease. What if our creators deliberately locked away 97% of our potential, giving us just enough to be good workers, but not enough to be their equals? And what if the key to unlocking this potential still lies within us, waiting for the right trigger, the right environmental signal, or perhaps the return of our creators to flip the switch? This turns the story of our past into the story of our potential future. We are not a finished product. We are an upgrade waiting to happen. This genetic tampering, this creation of a hybrid species, was not a smooth process. It was an act of rebellion by one faction of the Anunnaki, led by Enki, against the established order. This created a fundamental division from the very beginning. Enlil, the commander, saw humanity as a dangerous mistake. He never wanted us to be created. He saw our intelligence, our ability to reproduce so quickly, as a direct threat. The texts describe his repeated attempts to curb or destroy the human population. The Great Flood was just his most successful attempt. Enki, on the other hand, saw himself as our father. He was proud of his creation. He defied the council and saved a remnant of humanity. He is often depicted as the serpent in the Garden of Eden story, a figure who offers humanity knowledge, wisdom, and the chance to be like the gods, not out of malice, but out of a desire to see his children grow. The biblical story paints the serpent as a villain. But what if that is just propaganda written by the followers of Enlil? What if the serpent was the hero of the story, the one who tried to set us free? This cosmic conflict, this war between two brothers over the fate of their creation, is the master narrative of human history. It did not end with the flood. It has been playing out ever since in the shadows. All of human history can be seen as a proxy war between these two factions and their human followers. On one side, you have the forces of control, hierarchy, and suppression of knowledge, the legacy of Enlil. This is the path of blind faith, unquestioning obedience to authority, and the belief that humanity is fundamentally flawed and needs to be ruled by a divine elite. On the other side, you have the forces of liberation, knowledge, and individual sovereignty, the legacy of Enki. This is the path of the seeker, the scientist, the rebel. It is the drive to understand the universe, to unlock the secrets of our own DNA, and to claim our own divinity, to become the masters of our own destiny. These two philosophies have been at war for millennia, manifesting as conflicts between empires, religions, and ideologies. Think about the rise of secret societies throughout history. The Gnostics, the Knights Templar, the Rosicrucians, the Freemasons. These groups have often been persecuted by mainstream religious and political authorities. They have been accused of heresy and guarding forbidden knowledge. What if that is exactly what they were doing? What if they were the inheritors of Enki's tradition? Secret schools designed to preserve the true story of our origins and the scientific knowledge that was given to us by our Creator, protecting it from the Enlilite power structures that sought to erase it and keep humanity in the dark. The symbols they use, the all-seeing eye, the pyramid, the serpent eating its own tail, these are not just random mystical images. They are echoes of the Sumerian story. They are markers of a hidden stream of knowledge that has been flowing beneath the surface of official history, waiting for a time when humanity would be ready to understand. We are living in that time now. We have mapped the human genome. We have sent probes to the outer planets. We are beginning to understand quantum physics and the nature of consciousness. We are, for the first time, developing a language that would allow us to understand the science behind the Sumerian stories. We are becoming what they were, and this is why this story is so important right now. Because if this interpretation of our past is even partially true, it means we are approaching a critical moment. The implications of this critical moment are nothing short of staggering. For if we truly stand on the precipice of understanding, then humanity faces a profound choice: to remain bound by the narratives of control, the carefully constructed fictions that limit our potential, or to finally embrace the scientific inheritance that has been whispered through millennia. This ancient saga isn't merely a forgotten myth, it's a profound blueprint, a cosmic data packet detailing our origins and the very forces that shaped our consciousness. It challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question everything we've been told, and to reclaim a birthright of knowledge so vast, so transformative, It could unleash capabilities we can barely conceive. What if deciphering these Sumerian echoes isn't just about history, but about activating our own latent potential, unlocking a future where humanity truly masters its destiny? This is our time to choose.